Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kohatkar. Protests over the killings of unarmed black men by police continued over the weekend in cities around the country. The non-indictments of the police officers whose actions directly led to the killings of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and Eric Garner in New York have indicted a firestorm of anger in communities that have for years struggled to call attention to police abuse and killings. In Berkeley, hundreds of people gathered in front of the Berkeley Police Department. Protesters and police clashed as officers released tear gas on activists. In Riverside, California, a large crowd of people protesting police brutality were targeted by a BMW car that drove through, hitting several people. In Seattle, a number of people were arrested after confronting police. In Los Angeles on Friday, where this program is produced, a white man was fatally shot by police on the corner of Hollywood and Highland, a popular tourist spot. Police say the man was armed, but photos of the scene show the victim was holding a small Swiss Army knife. While LAPD has not released the name of the victim, witnesses say he was a street performer who used a fake knife as part of his act and that he did not attack anyone. Just a day earlier, activists had been protesting police abuse on that very corner. Daniel Pantaleo's non-indictment for the chokehold death of Eric Garner in Staten Island has drawn even more criticism from establishment figures, primarily because that incident was clearly captured on camera. Newly elected New York Mayor Bill de Blasio refused to endorse the grand jury decision, saying there needed to be a serious conversation about racism. Former President George W. Bush said in an interview that the decision was, quote, hard to understand. TV shows like SNL and Jon Stewart's The Daily Show also took aim at the decision. Joining us today to examine the wide-ranging impact of what's been happening in the last few weeks is Kevin Alexander Gray. He co-edited the new book, Killing Trayvons, an anthology of American violence, along with Jeffrey St. Clair and Joanne Wypejewski. His earlier books are The Decline of Black Politics from Malcolm X to Barack Obama and Waiting for Lightning to Strike, The Fundamentals of Black Politics. Welcome to Uprising, Kevin. So do you think that the situation that we see currently around the country is finally coming to a head because of a number of issues, of incidents that have piled one on top of the other so big that people just can't ignore? Or is there another reason why an existing issue that many people in the black community and communities of color have been talking about is finally breaking into the mainstream?
Well, some of it is social media and the ability to spread the message across the country or spread images and actions across the country instantaneously, and then people are connecting up in ways that they haven't in the past. Usually when something happened in South Carolina, it might take that train trip and the Pullman porters to take the news back to Chicago. So social media has played an impact, but, the Cambodians and the Laotians knew they were being bombed long before the American public did during the Vietnam War. And that's the case with police violence and racist violence in this country throughout the history of this country. What is amazing is that people think that this is new. This is not new. It's just that now we're really talking about the police state, and that has implications for everybody, not just for black people, but for the country at large. Do we want to live in a police state? Do we want to live in a country where one group of people have the right to shoot, to kill, and impose the death penalty and the use of force without due process on the streets of America? And how do we determine who these people are? And so, while there are a lot of blacks dying disproportionately due to police violence, whites die too, and they have to know that. And, with the Eric Garner case, this is a matter of a custodial arrest, basically, for a victimless crime, selling loose cigarettes. Is the death penalty what we want to invoke on a tax crime? I hate to mention Rush Limbaugh because I'm not a devotee of Rush Limbaugh, but as they say, a broken clock is right twice a day. Eric Garner was killed over taxes and cigarette taxes and the police trying to enforce those high taxes in New York City. That's what gave them the reason to stop Eric Garner, along with racial profiling. And, so that's an issue that people ought to confront. Then the other issue, instead of, just talking about cameras on police officers, we ought to talk about grand jury reform.
Right.
And why it is that grand juries are the tools of prosecutors. And we ought to talk about who else can have access to grand juries. So let's talk about grand jury reform and the fact that prosecutors have been able to use the grand juries to get their way as opposed to seeking justice. And then this whole idea of immunity for cops. We've got to. These are some issues that are not being talked about right now. There's a lot of talk about citizens review boards, and those are good. There's a lot of talk about cameras on police officers, and I think that's good. But we ought to talk about the police policy of shoot to kill and use of force, and the idea of slapping handcuffs on somebody during custodial arrest.